All right, good afternoon, folks. Thank you once again for joining us for this installment of the Summer STEM series, where today we're going to be discussing the STEM workforce, and we're going to be hearing from four wonderful individuals doing very different things and talking to you about how they got, to where they're currently at, what that journey, what that trajectory looked like for them, and also be sharing with you, some of the importance of STEM workforce, some of the demographics, the job demands, and also the opportunities that come with pursuing a STEM degree and ultimately getting a professional position within the STEM workforce. I wanted to take a moment and thank our partners at DoD STEM for helping to support the series. I also want to take an opportunity to thank our individual panelists, Eric Archer from NOAA, Osama Nathan from Nayfeh Pacific, Kaylee Looney from the founder from Reinvented Magazine, also a systems engineer, and Carlos Avila from Wick Engineering Company. Thank you all so much for making us a part of your afternoon, and thank you all who have tuned in to make us a part of your afternoon. We hope that you're able to walk away learning a little bit more about what your journey could look like as you continue to move forward. So I'll also want to take a moment to introduce, I like to say, my co-conspirator here in this session today, and that's Dr. Olivia Molinar Ingles. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and also Laura Santos, who really is the magic behind the scenes that allows for everything to happen. So thank you all again for your support with the series. I'll go ahead and take a moment to hand it over to my colleague Olivia, as she's gonna help kind of set the tone before we start more thoroughly introducing our panelists and get going with the conversation today. While we're switching out these slides, I also wanted to take a moment to encourage you all that are out there as attendees to please in the chat include and tell us either the institutions that you represent or what academic level you're in, so that our speakers are able to kind of get a sense of who's out there, who's in the audience, so they can gear their answers to those audiences. And then also, I also want to encourage you that maybe towards the latter part of the session here to start maybe putting in any questions that you might have specifically for one of the speakers or in general for the speakers on the panels, as I'm sure they would be excited to share some of their deep wisdom that they have with you, and hopefully see you as a colleague one day at some of the places where they're currently employed. So with that, Olivia, I'll hand it all over to you and take us away.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet everyone virtually. So today we're going to be talking about the STEM workforce. And one of the questions that I want to ask everyone first is a $1 million question. What are you going to be when you grow up? And most of us are, maybe some of us are high school students, but most of us here are probably at some point in our in our college or graduate education paths. So wait a second, aren't we all grown up? Shouldn't we all know what we want to be? And so this is coming from someone like myself who's already, I already have my doctorate, but I'm still trying to figure life out, and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do in the future. And so why are you really here? Do you love science because you're curious, you think outside the box, and you like or can problem solve? You want to make a lot of money? Well, that really depends on what you decide to do. You want to help people, for example, cure diseases, develop treatments, teach, motivate student learning, care for the environment, make video games, or even computer programming. So what do you want to be when you grow up, and how does your ideal career look like? And so here we're going to be talking about STEM and the STEM workforce. We have an awesome group of panelists that are going to be telling us about their career paths. So STEM, as we all know, stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And science is an interdisciplinary, STEM is an interdisciplinary field. For example, science, you can use mathematics, engineering, and technology, and they all converge at some point where you all use a little bit of each to be able to solve a problem and apply it to a problem. For example, in my field, I'm trying to understand how infections work. And so I'm trying to take this problem and trying to be able to see if we can try to be able to treat infections in a better way. So I can be, and all of you can be, software developers, meteorologists, doctors, anthropologists, astronauts, engineers, geoscientists, surveyors, space scientists. So all of these are all STEM careers, and you guys can do anything with the correct training as well as the correct education. So what does your education route look like in STEM education, right? And so here, there's a lot of letters, and so what do they all mean? So in the first category for undergraduates, we have our associate's degrees. So all of our associates of arts, our associates of science, and vocational careers. So this can be, you can get a job as a lab tech, as a dental hygienist, a licensed vocational nurse, a certified nursing assistant, and nuclear technician. Now, once you finish your 2-year degree, usually these are about 2 years, you can go from a 2-year college or 2-year institution to a 4-year, where you can obtain a bachelor's degree, and you can continue doing the same things that you were doing as a career, but now you can do a lot more. And with each step, you can gain more experience as well as more education in each field. And now, for example, you can be a web developer, you can become engineers of any sort, scientists, you can be a science writer, illustrator. And once you're done with your undergraduate, which is usually about 4 to 5 years, then now you can do a post-bac, which is about a year, or a master's of science, or any type of master's, which are usually about a year or 2 years, depending on the program. From here, now you can be a college lecturer, public health organizer, administrator, plus all of these different career paths that I already talked about. And then now, finally, you have all the advanced careers, which fall into the category also of graduate or professional, PharmD, so this is a PhD, a PharmD, JD, which is a lawyer, DDS, which is a dentist, and MD, among others. And this is very specialized work that you can only do. So you can become a principal investigator. This means that you can run your own lab at a university or biotech company. You can become a lawyer, a judge, medical doctor, dentist, or pharmacist. And so if we look at what you will be earning in terms of your education level, and whether you're doing a STEM job, you can see that for each of these, whether you're STEM or non-STEM, you're making about 10 to 20,000 more than your non-STEM counterpart. So this is something that we should really think about when you're thinking about how much will I be making? Will I be happy doing this career? And, do I really, can I work at, $45,000 and still, or $33,000, which one would be better, for example, here in San Diego, which is a really high cost of living. Now, if you can see in this graph, we can see that people with higher education, so 28%, some had college, so some had an associate's or did some college, bachelor's degree, or postgrad, are all mostly employed in STEM. Non-STEM employed are usually have a high school degree or less, some college, and then very less have a higher degree.
So as you're listening to everything that kind of Olivia just touched on right now, we really want you to not only think about, internally what it is that motivates you and what you want to do, but also the need, right? Be aware of the types of job supply and demand that there is out there in the nation with regards to STEM. And so in this figure here, what we want to show you is nationally how the growth has happened from 1990 to as recent as 2018. And you'll see that it's almost doubled, right? It's almost doubled. The demand in these sectors is definitely one that's been growing. Most of the growth that's going to happen in employment sector, according to labor statistics, is going to be in STEM. So that means that is where those what I say good paying jobs are going to be at. And so along with those good paying jobs is going to be the opportunities for upward mobility, social mobility, generational wealth, all these different things. In addition to what Olivia also mentioned, which is being able to have a livable wage, right? That you can afford to live comfortably, wherever it is that you're currently living at. Next slide, please, Olivia. And so again, just showing you here that the growth that had happened here it's extremely larger in comparison to other areas, other sectors, labor sectors that there are out there. The growth is continuously larger within STEM sectors than it is with non-STEM areas. Next slide, please. And so if we take a closer look, we can, it's broken down here by major groups. We're looking at, you know, respectively the different growth that's going to be seen within computer and mathematical occupations, education, training, and library occupations, management, life, physical, and social sciences, sales and related occupations, architecture and engineering occupations. And if you notice that there's really not a healthcare indicator here, which really allows for me to kind of take a moment and share with you kind of the side note that as you're continuing to move forward in your education, sometimes healthcare is actually not included within STEM, which is kind of weird, right, for a lot of us, because if you think of nursing, if you think of doctors, that's really the majority of what they're doing is life sciences, correct? But unfortunately, I think it's important for us to always be aware of these caveats that exist, especially as we're continuing throughout our higher education to be aware of these details. But as you can see on the sectors that are outlined here, there's a lot of different opportunities, whether it's directly being a scientist or an engineer or being supporting those individual roles, right? So you can be doing sales for pharmaceuticals, or you could be doing, you could be an attorney for patents. And so there's always all these other gray areas that aren't necessarily focused in which you can continue to support directly or indirectly these STEM workforce and labor statistics. So on this next slide here, it's again, you know, as we talk about the variety of jobs that there are within these workforces, I think it's also important to have an equally important conversation about what diversity looks like when we're talking about those current jobs. And so in this slide here, you see a little bit more of a breakdown of what it looks like within all the folks that are employed, and then also within those STEM jobs, right? And I think overall, if you were to kind of break everything down, you'll see that there's less than 5% of jobs within the STEM workforce are Black and brown individuals that are working within those jobs. And I would also say that the majority of the STEM workforce in these areas are predominantly male. And so, you know, as we look at this, I think it's the next slide here, we'll see that the representation of women in STEM jobs varies widely, right? So if we look at this image here, and I won't spend too much time on it, I want to highlight that you can see here that health-related jobs is the highest representation of women, but as we go lower there on that list, within engineering jobs, you have a lower representation of women in these jobs. And then you see kind of how it varies throughout the chart here. So there's really a lot of things to consider, right? When we're thinking about what the right job will be for us, as if it wasn't hard enough to try to figure out what major you're going to be, you know, as you continue in your education. And maybe our panelists can share about that in a little bit more detail, right? Sometimes the path is unclear, and it's not always a linear path, right? It's not like I decide, hey, I'm gonna, you know, I know from when I'm young, maybe for some of us we do, but for the majority of us, I would say that it's an explorative process, and it's definitely not a linear process. You know, we start off thinking that I want to be a doctor, but then I realize that I get squirmy when I see blood, right? So that's probably not going to be a good profession for me to follow. It might be that growing up, I broke things apart, right? And I had this curiosity for how things work, but I never knew that engineering jobs would help me kind of allow that curious gift that I had to be something that I got paid for. And so definitely there's a lot of different components that add to what we ultimately decide not only to study, but what profession we end up in or we work towards, right? And so again, I wanted to show you more of a local snapshot because many of you are from San Diego. I know I noticed that a lot of folks are visiting us from out of town. Fantastic. So it's also important for you to take into account what this might look like for you regionally, right? It could be that you are in an area that's more agricultural, and so there might be some more focused career opportunities in those areas. And what does engineering look like in an agricultural setting? What does engineering look like in an area that's near a forest, right? Or, you know, more dense population or less populated, right? So all these things are very important, but for here in San Diego, which we have close to about 2 million people here, we want to take into account, again, we see that there's this growth that has continued to happen, from 1990 to as of recently as 2018, that a lot of the growth is happening here is in STEM jobs, right? And it really isn't too surprising considering that we have, we are somewhat of a military town, and we are a biotechnology, technology hub for a lot of startups, and a lot of different companies like Qualcomm are here. So really not surprising that the growth of the jobs is there. But does that mean that we have a diverse group of people going into those jobs? Does that mean that my neighbors, my family members are actually getting into those jobs? And if they're not, what is it that can help us move towards that direction, right? Including being aware that those types of jobs exist. And so again, I wanted to show this figure here that also, as we talk about gender, as we talk about diversity, as we talk about equity and inclusion, that we also are mindful of the disparities that also continue to exist between men and women in representation of these STEM jobs. So again, this is more within San Diego County as we look at STEM jobs by gender over time. So really a robust conversation, right? I think definitely so much that can be said within the next hour that we have with our panelists, but very different components that I want to make sure that we communicate with you as attendees, but also with our panelists. So as we move forward and introduce our panelists, and as we move forward and ask questions of our panelists, that I want to encourage you all out there as attendees to really, really be, be open and be authentic and be genuine in your questions. And this is one of those platforms that we want to prepare for you, where you better believe that you're going to get straight up answers from our panelists who have been hand selected because they're going to give you the real deal, right? And they're going to show you, how they got to where they got, and also, how taking different parts of who you are and you fold them into these occupations, right? So it's going to be really a jazzed up conversation, and I really want to encourage you. I can't encourage you enough, again, as attendees, to ask those questions, and as panelists, to take the opportunity to really share with us things that you wish you would have heard, or things that you wish somebody would have shared with you, or that you would have learned earlier on, or learned along your path that kind of helped you to get to where you're at right now. And Eric, I see you, looking into your mind right now, really, and grasping for those things, right? Because I think a lot of us have been doing what we've done for so many years, that we have the tendency to kind of just get stuck in where we're at right now and problem solve and think, and we don't have many opportunities oftentimes to kind of dive deep and say, what, if I could talk to the younger Eric, the younger Osama, or Carlos, or Caeley, what would I tell them, right? What would I tell them? So this is that invitation, that call to action for you to, I'll say it in these last two words, to bring it, right? So with that, I'm going to ask Olivia to introduce our wonderful panelists to you, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Olivia, that was your cue.
That was my cue. Do I have the slides up?
Yes, Laura, can we get the slides, please?
All right, can you hear me? Okay. All right, so I'm going to be introducing first Dr. Eric Archer, who got his bachelor's degree at Virginia Wesleyan College in biology, where he entered the marine biology program at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. He did his thesis project comparing morphometric and genetic variation in striped dolphins. After defending his thesis, Eric stayed at SWFSC working on a variety of projects examining indirect effects of the eastern tropical Pacific tuna fishery on dolphin reproduction and behavior. He transitioned back to the marine mammal genetics program, where he conducted studies of population genetics and taxonomy on small delphinids and large whales. When not at work, he indulges in a variety of hobbies, such as Korean martial arts and aviation. Thank you, Dr. Archer, for being here and helping us teach our students about STEM. Our next panelist is Dr. Osama Nathan, who received his Bachelor's of Science degree at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He did his master's and PhD degrees from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is a quantum memory integrated product team leader with NIWC PAC. Next, we have Kaylee Looney. Her Twitter tagline reads, "Rocket scientist by day, editor-in-chief by night," and that's exactly what she does. She graduated from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University with a Bachelor's of Science in Aerospace Engineering, and now she works as a full-time as a systems engineer. Once the workday is over, she comes home and works on a Reinvented magazine. She is a founder and president of this nonprofit organization, where Caeley works to empower young girls to pursue STEM fields. Outside of work and running the profit, Caeley is continuing to advance her education by pursuing a master's in science in space systems engineering part-time at Johns Hopkins University Online. Thank you for being here as well, Caeley. And lastly but not least, we have Carlos Avila. He was born and raised in San Diego, raised in Tijuana, Mexico, and attended public schools in the South Bay, starting since 5th grade. He attended Cali Poly San Luis Obispo, where he obtained a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering with an emphasis in Environmental and Water Resources Engineering in 2002. He has worked for Rick Engineering since 2003 in their Civil Engineering and Land Development Division. He has about more than 16 years of professional experience. So if you have any questions about him as a civil designer, project manager, and senior project engineer, go ahead and start, thinking about those so you can ask him. Thank you, Carlos, for being here as well.
Fantastic, and thank you so much for the introduction, Olivia. As you all see, we have a pretty broad spectrum of folks and experience that's available here. And so I wanted to kind of move on into our first question, and so. Generally when we introduce people in their bios, it sounds so polished, right? It sounds like, man, they just got it going on. It must have been easy. They must have just, it was handed to them. Was that necessarily true? I mean, just by a simple nod, is that the way it worked out? Or probably not, right? So my first question is going to be, would you mind giving us the real deal on maybe in a 3 to 5 minute kind of explanation? Tell us who you are and kind of how you got to that polished off version that we just heard of you. And maybe we can start off with, we'll start off with Caeley, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So we talked a little bit about, what do you want to be when you grow up? And if you knew me like way back in elementary and middle school, I wanted to be a fashion designer. And then you would look at like a picture of me back then and you'd absolutely know like that was not going to happen for me, like I should not be in fashion design. And so I was really lucky. Both of my parents were engineers. My mom worked on aircraft carriers for the Navy, and my dad worked a lot in computer science for healthcare systems. And so once I started getting into, some of those classes where I could pick science electives and things like that, my parents were very quick to kind of push me in the right direction, as they like to say. And so in 6th grade, my mom dragged me to a first robotics meeting at my local Girl Scout council. And that's where I got my first taste for, science and tech. I fell in love with the robots and the programming and all of that. And so I kind of grew up through that first robotics program. I used my high school experiences to kind of figure out what part of STEM I wanted to go in. I did a project on the Mars rover in 12th grade and was yes, space is where I want to be. And so that's why I chose to go to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I'll be honest, my time in college certainly was not the easiest. I kind of learned a lot about my mental health related problems. I ended up taking some time off during college to kind of deal with my anxiety and depression and all of that, as well as a lot of the imposter syndrome that came from being a woman in STEM. My school, while I loved it, was like 7% women when I went there. And so very often I felt that pressure of being the only girl in the room. And so I kind of rekindled my love for space while doing a internship with Kennedy Space Center, where I worked a lot on their Orion capsule, as well as did some research and attitude determination and control systems with SwampWorks on dual quaternions, which I can talk about a little bit more later if you guys would like. But then stumbled upon my full-time job as a mission analyst or systems engineer, where I work predominantly on small satellite systems. But I think a lot of my experiences as a woman in STEM stuck with me, and that's what made me so passionate about fighting for gender equality in STEM space. And so I started Reinvented Magazine, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. It's one of the first ever print magazines written specifically for girls in STEM. And so all that we do and all the content we produce is meant to just empower and inspire the next generation of young girls to, feel confident enough to pursue their interests in science, tech, engineering, and math. And so a lot of the work that I do today now, when I, like my Twitter tagline says, when I'm not working as a quote unquote rocket scientist or working on satellites, I'm home fighting for gender equality and kind of trying to put those role models at the forefront of this movement to motivate more girls to, consider STEM as an option.
Awesome. Thank you, Kaylee. Thank you for being, sharing, being so vulnerable and sharing with us some of the challenges and actually, highlighting for us the importance of having that additional support that it sounded like you had for some of your journey. So thank you for sharing that with us. Let's go with Carlos. Carlos, would you mind going next?
Hi, Beto. No, not at all. Thanks. I guess first off, thank you, and Olivia, your co-conspirator, for inviting me to this panel. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Speaking about yourself is not always the easiest thing to do, but I do love what I do for a living, and my path here could certainly help others, and hopefully inspire others to follow their paths. So like Olivia explained in my bio, I border child. I grew up here in San Diego in the South Bay. From an early age, I had an affinity towards math and science. There were school subjects I enjoyed, but in my upbringing, in my home environment, family environment, there wasn't a lot of mentors around or anything as far as choosing a career path. So I just kept an open mind as I grew up, and it was really a drafting class in 9th grade that first piqued my interest into civil engineering. To this day, I'm in a work setting that's very practical. My career path has been just very practical. But you were mentioning earlier, got me thinking about, what other paths I could have taken. And I don't mean to go in circles here, but I think early on, had I known that maybe there were other possibilities in say business or a legal profession. Nowadays, I work with a lot of land use attorneys and just non-engineers that are tied to the construction land development field that I'm in, and I just sometimes shake my head. I'm like, wow, had I known that 30 years ago, the benefits of public speaking, of technical writing, or in research, then maybe other paths would have opened up sooner. But just back to where I was, I in 9th grade, due to a drafting class that I took, I really developed an affinity towards civil engineering, and that coupled with the fact that I always enjoyed geography, natural sciences, the physical world around me, civil engineering seemed like a good fit. And then, even Cal Poly, I found out about Cal Poly early on in the middle of high school, and I kind of just set the course, and I knew that's where I wanted to go to study civil and environmental engineering. And you know, like most engineering students, while in college, getting through the lower division classes was just a constant uphill battle. It was a challenge getting through 3 physics classes and 5 calculus classes, and but you know, climb the mountain, so to speak, and then the you know, coming back down was really fun. Upper division courses, and really cemented my decision in following that path, and then just always seeked professional organizations, other, you know, people in the field, internships, and they really wrote me into kind of where I would launch my career in a you know, very practical sense, working at a private consulting firm. And I enjoy it. I love my job. It's very dynamic. The field of civil engineering in itself is very dynamic. It changes every day. I work with many different types of consultants on the public and private side, and then seeing your projects come to life is just you know, the cherry on the cake. So thanks again for having me. Look forward to next questions.
Awesome, thank you. And I love cherries on cake, by the way. So I, you know, what I heard in your story was that it wasn't easy, right? It was definitely challenging, and you know, navigating the process can sometimes be a lonely one, right? Especially if you're the first gen in your family to kind of move towards a certain direction. Thank you for sharing sharing that with us. Osama, I'm going to jump to you next, because I know you got all dressed up for us, and I appreciate it, because I know it's warm over here in San Diego, brother. I'll tell you. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. It happens. It happens to all of us.
Yep. Good afternoon to all the students tuning in. By being here, you're taking an enormous step. So it shows your passion. It shows your interest in STEM, and that's definitely how you have to keep going forward. I was just a normal undergrad student, just like you, and I had the ups and downs of any normal undergrad, though there's one element that I think is critical, is you can do whatever you want in terms of the letters or the profession that Olivia mentioned, but try to do something that you feel that you can be the best at. And that was the key for me. I excelled in STEM classes, for example. I enjoyed going to those classes more than the other classes. That was just the fact. And more than that, in my free time, meaning not having school or homework, I enjoyed as a hobby doing stuff STEM related. What did that mean at the time? That meant tinkering. There was computers back in the 90s were starting to come online, figuring out how to program them. The internet, the first websites were starting to come online, and I was just so intrigued by this technology, and I got hooked. It was a passion. So outside of the classroom, as well as inside the classroom, I knew I was passionate about STEM. The cool thing for me about then going to college was the colleges are great. I mean, they have all these curricula established and world-class professors. And it was so amazing because the classes they were teaching, I was enrolled in electrical engineering and computer science. They were teaching me how all this stuff functioned, what the physics and the engineering behind it was. So it took that coolness to a whole new level. We were understanding how the electrons move in the transistor, how the memory stores information, how the internet is formulated. And again, I kept that passion in that field. Of course, as I said, you always have ups and downs where maybe you don't do so good in one exam or one class. But as a whole, at the maturity level of us as an undergrad, you should know what you're passionate about and what you feel you could be the best. So with that mindset, I didn't have I had plans, for example, a desire to complete a PhD, but how you get there doesn't have to be set in stone on a piece of paper. We know the world has dramatic changes. We see with the COVID, but even in my day, there was major events happening too. Of course, not at the dramatic level as COVID from now, but the resources we have here as a nation in the United States, the beauty is you don't have to have everything set in stone. The system behind it, opportunities are created. Uh, in my case, for example, there was the Silicon Valley boom in the Bay Area, and that was something new. But I knew that that was something that I had to do in order to continue in this field. So I took jobs as an undergrad in Silicon Valley, which was a fantastic experience. When I returned back to the university, I joined a research group and started to do some research with some of the world-class faculty. And my advice on these things is you got to know what your priorities are. So obviously, as an undergrad, when I was in your situation, I knew that in order to get to the next step I wanted to do, I had to have good grades. That's one of the basics that I had to have. But at the same time, it was also on my priority list to get some research experience, to do some volunteering, and so on and so forth. So as long as you have a balance in your mind and you know what your priorities are, and that's the way to perceive it. So I recommend, doing the best you can to get the grades that are needed to go to the next step that you desire, but also participate in some of those other activities, but do it with a balance. Know what your priorities are in order to succeed. And this philosophy I've continued throughout. So after graduating from undergrad and then grad and having the job in Silicon Valley, the dynamics took me towards the Department of Defense, for example. As you know, we had some major wars going on in Afghanistan and Iraq. So there was a lot of need for highly skilled STEM professionals to take on those roles. So the dynamics, the geopolitics dynamics, on the downside, we all know what it is, for example, with COVID now, but you should also look for the opportunities. For example, now with COVID, there's a lot of new opportunities. Here in San Diego, we've got the major companies, biotech, like doing the vaccines. You have all of the other infrastructure behind it. So be flexible in adapting towards the geopolitical dynamics and accept those things as a positive, not as a negative. So have that flexibility, know where you want to go, but have that flexibility in the steps of how to get there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Osama. And so I heard, pursue what you believe you're good at or enjoy. I've heard the importance of advocating for yourself and looking for different opportunities, and also the importance of kind of the perspective that we go into situations with, right? And rather looking at opportunity rather than limitations. So thank you for sharing that. We're looking forward to hearing a little bit more in the next, within the next amount of time that we have. And last but definitely not least, Mr. Eric Archer, please tell us more about your journey, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Beto, and everybody. First, how's my sound? Can everybody
Good.
hear okay?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks so much for having us all here and organizing this. I think this is a really useful and good thing, and I kind of wish I was on the other side of the screen because, as you said, these are the kinds of interactions that can I think make the difference, because there's just so many unknowns, in this process, that it's useful to get them as early as you can and to get some of that insight. Um, I'm originally from Maryland, and just outside of the Washington, D.C. area. And my story really centers around the Smithsonian. I grew up going to the museums on a regular basis. My parents would take me there when I was a kid, and you know, any weekend when there wasn't something else going on, I would beg to go. And I bounced back and forth between you know, all the museums I would go to, and I've, you know, this was in the 70s, so there's actually museums I've seen, you know, built that some museums aren't there anymore, and I loved them all. I just loved looking at stuff, at old stuff, at mechanics of stuff, at paintings, and bones, and anything that was collected. But I just started having a fascination, you know, early on, like most kids do, with you know, things like planes and big animals. So the first memory I have is of wanting to be a pilot. I just wanted to fly things. It just seemed so cool to be able to take this machine in the air, and you know, here I am surrounded by these iconic machines. You know, every other weekend I'm, you know, 5 feet away from the Wright brothers flyer, from, you know, some of these machines that have made all this difference. And then, you know, half hour later, I'm standing next to a T-Rex, and these things just, you know, fill your imagination. And then at some point, puberty hit, and I became 6'8", and realized that I'm not going to be a pilot for a living. That's not going to happen. Plus, you know, if everybody, of course, wants to be a fighter pilot, and realized, you know, I don't like wearing uniforms, and the thought of, you know, having to actually be in a war was just not all that appealing. So as I, you know, kind of kept my thinking, what am I going to do? What do I want to do? I realized, you know, I really do have a curiosity for these big animals, and watch, you know, Jacques Cousteau and all the nature shows, and I was just fascinated by you know, the diversity of mammals. That there's this creature that evolved, and its offspring is everything from a mouse, you know, to a blue whale. And how does that happen? How do you get that much diversity? You know, and what do these things do? And it's not there anymore, but in the old Hall of Oceans in Smithsonian, there was a life-size blue whale model. It was kind of attached to the ceiling, hanging to the side of a wall, and you could walk under it. And next to that wall was outlines and models of other marine mammals, and so you could really get a sense of how different these things were. And, you know, for a kid, that's a really impactful thing, to walk under 100-foot animal, and have that just sort of burn in your memory. So when I went to college, I went to a small liberal arts school because I kind of liked the small school setting, and liked writing and reading. I went into a biology major, knowing nothing about it. I mean, I didn't really know what the jobs were, and what the work was like. But my last 2 years, my junior and senior year, the summers, I volunteered at the Smithsonian. So I went back and spent time there working with their stranding group. So marine mammals, whales and dolphins strand, and there's usually a system in place that goes and collects the carcasses and works them up for the museums. And so I was just a college kid, learning about anatomy from some of the world's best you know, marine mammal biologists. And it was a changing experience, because I really got to see more about how science worked, and got to literally be hands-on with a lot of the kinds of questions that were being asked at the time. I then applied through for graduate school, again, not really knowing anything about graduate school process, but having a sense that I wanted to go and keep studying marine mammals. And through a odd twist of fate, the person who has become my advisor was a close colleague of the person that I happened to be volunteering for at the Smithsonian, who was the curator of mammals there. And I guess there were some conversations back and forth that I wasn't a total waste of time. So he accepted me into the lab, and that was at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And that change, going from this little liberal arts school in southeastern Virginia to Scripps, which is kind of recognized as one of the top oceanographic institutions in the world, was massive. It was like drinking from a fire hose. I went straight from a bachelor's right into the PhD program, and that's when I really had to learn how science happened. And there was a lot of challenges there. It was a hard transition for me. I was nowhere close to being prepared for the program, and I had to get up to speed. And I completed it and did a decent job. And my advisor was working for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I stayed on at the lab there and through various contracts, and then got a full-time job there. And that's where I still am in a different position, actually head of the program that he actually started when he was there. So it's sort of been a full circle kind of thing. And it's been a long journey. My path has hit a lot of the beats that the previous people have talked about. There's been a lot of kind of trying to follow your own curiosity and your own passion. That's been huge. But there have been a lot of challenges, especially as an underrepresented person, as a minority in this field. It was only afterwards that I've learned some of this. I discovered after out of curiosity, looking back, that I was the first African American marine biology PhD at Scripps. Before me, they hadn't had another one. I'm adjunct at Scripps now, and I'm the only African American faculty in the marine biology program there, being adjunct. They have another one. I think she's in geosciences, and the two of us are the first that they've had as faculty. I'm also the only. So I've been in the field for 30 years now, studying marine mammals, and I'm the only African American marine mammologist that I know of. So I go to conferences, and I do not see or have not met others. Not to say that they're not out there, but I don't meet them. I don't know them, and I know quite a few people. And it's just more of a testament to how the disparity of diversity in the field, and there's been quite a bit. I think Caeley mentioned it. There's been quite a bit of imposter syndrome in that process, and trying to work through it you find different tactics, but it comes down to realizing that that we all have the same brain in our skulls. We all can do the same work, and and if anybody else around me is sort of doing that work, well, I've got the same ability to do it, and just kind of working through that. There's nothing fundamentally that keeps you from doing what you want to do, and so it's trying to keep that in mind as you plow through things. But as the other people said, there will always be challenges and things that kind of seem to be barriers, but more often than not, there's ways around it. And gone through, sort of several of those kinds of rounds. But in a nutshell, that's the general path I've taken.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you. It's a good nutshell there. Olivia, will you guide us to the next question, please? I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm going to clump two together. Thank you so much, Aaron and David. So kind of your questions are pertaining as to how do you get a position fresh out of college? And David, you mentioned how do you network while you're studying? So I'm going to say networking is a really huge component of getting your first job. So can someone elaborate more on how, tips on things that they need to be doing while in college that will set them up for success for career in engineering or any STEM field for the matter? And does anybody want to take that? Carlos.
Yeah, I could, those were two great questions by Aaron and David. And if I may, I could maybe just answer both. They hit close to home. You know, when I was in college, I always worked during college. So my participation in student organizations and clubs was minimal or sporadic at best. I did attend as many conferences as I could, student leadership conferences or conferences through the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And I try to network as best as I can, but you know, with heavy work class load and working off campus is always a challenge. But in my years, you know, working in the industry and meeting a lot of young engineers and a lot of students who you know, are still working towards their studies, I see both sides, and I see a benefit to, you know, either way. I've met great young engineers who just had never attended a student conference or network in a professional setting at all. They come in, they interview great because their personality, their leadership qualities come through very quickly, whether you've been at, you know, seasoned resume workshops or you know, professional conferences or not. So I would say if you have the ability and the time to you know, devotion to get involved, it's definitely the most beneficial. I would caveat that with saying, as long as you really show your leadership qualities, that you spend your time wisely, that you're an officer of a club, or you lead some sort of you know, effort within that organization, and not just showing up to meetings, you know, for pizza or whatnot. It's just filler material in the resume without that leadership experience. You could obtain great leadership abilities, you know, managing a shoe store or mall. You know, it's far removed from the engineering field, but especially in the private consulting field that I'm in, you know, sales, marketing, knowing how to market, sell yourself, your projects, deal with clients. I mean, there's a lot of soft skills, non-technical skills that, you know, you learn. The best way to learn them is in a professional setting, whether it's engineering or not. To David's question about, I think that was David's question about how, you know, how to advance your career from a young engineer and so on. I'd say, you know, everyone's going to tell you work hard, of course, but if you're not careful, if you work hard and keep your head down and you're not cognizant of creating opportunities for yourself or rejecting, maybe there's opportunities sent your way that you just don't know are there, you're gonna put yourself in a box, or worse, others are gonna put you in a box, and you may be a great design engineer who's just killing it, you know, and just a great engineer, but without the experience or the opportunities to work on, you know, different types of projects, it's going to be very difficult to kind of move up the corporate ladder, as they say. So I would recommend that you rarely say no to anything, that, you know, you welcome challenges as often as you can, so you could learn from as many people on doing as many things as possible. Sure, making mistakes on the way, but I think that type of go-getter attitude is what is going to help you succeed and grow.
Thank you, Carlos. I want to interject just real quick, just to be mindful of time. It's 3 minutes till 4. I want to honor everybody's time. I don't mind staying on a little bit extra because I think we're kind of getting some good nuggets here. So I just wanted to put that out there. If anybody needed to log off for whatever reason, that's absolutely fine. But if our panelists don't mind and we could stay a few minutes over, you know, I'd be happy to kind of make sure that we get all these little nuggets that you're throwing our way. So thank you. So yeah, if somebody else can continue that, you know, with responding to those 2 questions that were posted, that would be fantastic. Eric?
Yeah, and I mean, David's question is for electrical engineering, but I think there's a general question about networking there that applies, you know, kind of across the board, and so there, and this goes to actually Dana's question about tips for preparing for a PhD as well. So there's a little bit of overlap. I'm speaking from the life sciences field. Staying current is absolutely critical. So reading papers and kind of becoming a little bit of a fan of different labs or people that are doing interesting things that you might be interested in. So becoming a little wonky on what the state of the art of things is, and then getting in touch with those labs and finding out what they're thinking about and what they're like, where is the field going? So like when you're in an undergrad situation, you're often learning about you're getting a foundation, and that foundation can be in a sense old. It's important, but it's not always state of the art. But in PhD, you're getting into a lab, you're getting into a situation where people are want to push the envelope, and so you're making this jump kind of in a time place, and that jump is you can often find that in the most recent papers and, you know, whatever you're interested in. So you can find labs and even students. So sometimes PIs might be, you know, might seem like they're too busy, but you can talk to their students and network with them, and they can you know, give you a sense of of who's doing what in the field, and it's just a good way to stay up, see what positions are opening. You can learn about mail lists or blogs or different people to follow that it will give you information about where things are going, and it also will help you get your mind in a place and your name out there as you're preparing for, you know, the transition to a PhD.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Eric. Kaylee or Osama, would you like to chime in on that?
I will, sure. Quick answer would be do an internship. Try doing research, get connected with a professor. Don't wait to get the full-time job to find out whether you like it or not. So when I used to be the first person in line at the job fair over at University of Illinois. Twice a year, we had a major job fair where you had about every company, institute, university there, and you could talk to the reps. By the next day, sometimes they would have a signing package for an internship or a co-op. So do that. Classes that you took, professors that you met, that you felt that the topic was interesting. Usually professors integrate some of their research in their lectures. Talk to them, especially if you did well. See if you could join, volunteer, or even get paid to do 5, 6, 7 hours a week volunteer in the lab. You will then know when you do those 2 things which path you want to go. So you don't have to really guess about it. Use the resources on campus. and do that and find out hands-on which path you want to take.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Kaylee, that would lead us to you, and feel free to also kind of touch on how you've folded in this passion of yours and taken the lead. Yeah, you've kind of pressed yourself into something that's new. It was probably a little scary. What does that look like to be able to bring together different facets that make up who you are, and what is, how does that tie into everything?
Yeah, so I think I can talk a little bit about like the networking aspect first, in that I think my biggest piece of advice is to be your own best advocate. I think when you go into networking, like you're going in thinking that the person you're trying to network with is like the coolest, most awesome person in the world, and they can give you all this awesome stuff and opportunities. And you should be really like feeling a lot more confident about your position in this potential relationship that you're about to build. And, fight for yourself and your own behalf, and don't be afraid to talk yourself up, because that is how you're going to get those jobs. You're not going to get a job or an internship by sitting there holding your resume like this and kind of hiding behind all of the amazing experience that you have and not actually talking about it. So I think that's my first piece. But I think the other part is, I did start my own nonprofit, and I run a staff of about 100 volunteers now. And so that part comes with the, if you're super worried about climbing that corporate ladder, make your own. And do something you're passionate about and be your own boss. And so yes, right now I do kind of wear the two hats. I do work full time as a mission analyst on satellite systems, and I come home and I run this organization. But I identified a need, and I found out what my passion really was, outside of just engineering. And that led to me kind of finding that confidence I just talked about, and starting my own nonprofit, my own organization, and building up my staff that way to kind of fight for what I believed in, but also, to do this thing on my own without those, people above me telling me no, or, whatever it is. So I think the other piece of advice there is to really like not be afraid to do your own thing and follow your own heart, and, just become your own boss.
Awesome pieces. I have somebody asking if the panelists feel comfortable, if you would be willing to share your contact information, so that they can reach out at some point. Since we're encouraging them to do networks, right, and networking, they want to hold you to that, right? So they're saying, hey, will you be part of my network? So feel free to drop that in there. I know, the conversation, man, it just flew by, right? I mean, you feel an hour would suffice, but it doesn't. Because there's so many different valuable things to be heard. We were 5 minutes over. It's, I feel like we're just kind of gaining momentum with the dialogue here. But unfortunately, I want to honor everybody's time. I did want to, however, create the opportunity for any last questions or for any closing comments from any of you panelists. Again, what would you tell your younger self, listening to some of the questions and kind of listening to the other panelists? My question would be to you, what was it like for you to get that first good gig, right? Where you're like, wow, like, okay, I got hired as an engineer. I got hired as a scientist. Share that excitement with us, if you don't have any other closing remarks, because I think it's important for us to also see, when it goes from being surreal, right? We spent so many years in education, and then all of a sudden you make that transition to actually being a scientist and engineer. You're like, wait a minute, I've been called a lot of things in my life, but never a scientist or an engineer, right? So if you want to have closing remarks, or if you want to talk to that last question that I'm kind of posing for you, please feel free to do so.
I'll jump in. So, one thing I would have liked to have known that I had to work out on my own is it's one of marketing. It's important to early to start branding yourself, and what that for me what that means is making it clear to everybody else around you what you bring to the table that nobody else does. Everybody has, at a minimum, one superpower, and and you need to, as Caeley said, being your own best advocate, you need to let the world know what that is, and advertise it. And it's the thing that's going to make you valuable to employers and to team members, to labs, and develop it. Hopefully that thing is something you enjoy doing and you get something out of. Usually those two things cross, but identify it, recognize it, develop it, make it yours, own it. Because that's what's going to, I think, that kind of thing is the thing that separates you from everybody else, and it pulls you ahead in the field. It lets you find a niche that you fit in that nobody else will. So that it's a marketing thing. And to Beto's question, that moment was awesome, and I remember it today. Just like you, it was immediately. It was the first cruise that I went on. It was a graduate student. I'm on a ship. We're 2 days out and off the Oregon coast, and we've just had a sighting of blue whales. We've been working up to them. I've never seen a blue whale live in life, and you see the blow, you see the back of the animal, and it's at 2 or 3 miles, and so it's like a picture there. About, I don't know, half hour later or so, we're still working these animals, getting closer to them, and they surface right next to the ship. I'm on the bow, I'm looking down, I knew they were somewhere, and this 90-foot animal comes right up, next to my face, rolls over, and you see that eye, and that eye is, like a dinner plate, and it's looking at you, and it all clicks in, and I'm going, this is the animal I was walking under when I was 8 years old. I'm out here at sea with, the top marine biologists in the world, and I'm collecting data. I'm actually doing it. It's a wonderful feeling.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for taking us there with you, man. We definitely greatly appreciate it. Anybody else want to go next?
Sure. So for me, I think the one of the biggest things I would tell my younger self is to be bold and dream big. I think that looking back, there's a lot of things that I've done in my life that I never would have even imagined I would have ever been able to do when I was little. I think, the most real moment for me was during my internship at Kennedy Space Center. And, I was in my last semester and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I know I love space. And I know that I love all this satellite stuff and rockets, right? But that was real. I was there, I was able to watch the Falcon Heavy launch, the very first Falcon Heavy. And I was this naive little aspiring rocket scientist, and all these engineers were standing around me and they were like, you're probably going to want to wear something over your ears. Do you want these earplugs? And I'm like, you're fine. I've seen rocket launches from a distance before. This will be fine. And as they break the sound barrier, man, coming back down, they were right. But in that moment, those are the crazy things that really stick with me and will continue to stick with me to remind me exactly why I love what I'm doing and why I wanted to go into engineering in the first place. And so I think it comes back to that, I think it was Carlos who said it, was take every opportunity that comes your way, say yes. Don't be afraid to feel like you belong in the places that you're being offered to be. And own it once you're there. Be bold and continue to always dream bigger dreams, because whether you think so or not in that moment that you're offered them, these things are achievable.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kaylee. Appreciate it. Osama.
To conclude again, I think all students must be on the right path, but put in that work. And what I mean there is, be humble. If that means staying late at the company or at the research lab, even you're not getting paid, at the undergrad level, do those kind of things, because you're doing it, again, as I started, it has to be also a hobby for you. So that will enable you to do great, super things. So you have to be willing to take those humble steps, consult with professional resources at the university, at the college. They have extraordinary guidance counselors, professors. They can help boost your resume. Get that advice, take it to heart. I know when I was an undergrad, you don't really want to hear that goofy thing you put on your resume is goofy, and you think that it's gonna help you. But take those advices to heart. There's a lot of experienced folks at the university, and they all want you to succeed. Again, the STEM workforce are our future. Here at DoD, we look forward to the next generation of STEM. You are the future that are going to help our warfighter continue to succeed in its mission, and just keep up the great work. And absolutely, if anybody wants to reach out for further questions, we would be very happy to do that.
Excellent. Thank you, Osama. And I heard in that, be prepared to make sacrifices, because it's not going to be easy, and you're going to have to be resilient, and you're going to have to brand yourself as best as you can. Carlos, you want to take us home?
Yeah, sure. Looking back, like Kaylee said, my younger self, I would tell students to, ask a lot of questions. Yeah, dream big, yes, network, seek what path you want to take, but just ask as many questions you can along the way. Even, when you get that internship or that first job, one of the mistakes I see young engineers make sometimes, they come in, they feel like we expect them to do more than they're able to. And so, just be a sponge and ask as many questions as you can. And then from that, you could begin to kind of define who you are, find your strengths, your weaknesses. 2 more points. It's great to work hard. It's great to collaborate and be in a good work environment, all that good stuff. But, it's always important to be in a place where your ideas are valued, where your effort is maybe not so much, of course we all love recognition, but that your effort is respected, it's valued, that your ideas evolve into something. Don't pigeonhole yourself into a place where again, where you're going to hit ceilings sooner rather than later. And then last thing, I guess just to finish off, that humanities teacher, that English teacher, us in STEM, we take them for granted. I know I did. I can't stress enough the importance of communication skills with verbal, nonverbal, soft skills, writing skills, whether it's technical or not. That gets you a very long way. I feel like I'm a good writer now, but I'm also, I'm 15 years plus in my career. It's taken me a while. I wish I could, go back and maybe take a few more creative writing class or something, rhetoric, something non-technical that could help along the way.
Excellent points. Thank you, Carlos. I did also want to mention, one of the charts that we saw earlier that my colleague Olivia had shared was all the bubbles, right? And how all the different disciplines kind of go over each other. Don't forget that there's a lot of new directions and new disciplines that are always coming up, right? And I think if we think about biochemistry or nano engineering, within nano, there's just so many different nooks and crannies, right? And in chemistry and all these different areas that maybe might not be the thing that people always talk about, or there is no job that says, nano engineer, right? But it's called something else. I think it's important for us to, that's why it's so valuable for us to do research and advocate for ourselves and put ourselves out there and find out what's going on around us. So we can take all this great information that you just received and mix it up with knowledge about all these different opportunities and be able to start crafting out and traversing the landscape as we make our own journey. So with that, I want to, before I give Olivia an opportunity to kind of give her closing remarks, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. And I truly mean that. I think it's so important that we're genuine and authentic with one another and value each other's time. And thank you wholeheartedly for being so vulnerable, so transparent and authentic with us. And for all of you that have chimed in today, that joined us, because there is a million other things that you could decide to do right now, but you decided to take a moment to invest in yourself and listen from these seasoned individuals. Olivia, any closing remarks? All right, we got you. You were the muted one this time.
Yeah. So, thanks to everyone for coming on to learn more about STEM, and for the panelists giving us a view of what it is to, go into these careers. And I kind of just want to add one more thing that I think is really important, and is just, obtaining all the mentors you can. I think that's really important. And I think that's one thing that has helped me. So for example, you can have 5 different mentors that are going to tell you 5 different things. And at the end of the day, it's what you think is going to be best for you. But you might have a mentor who's more hands-on. You might have a mentor who's more hands-off. You might have a mentor who wants to look at your whole personal statement, but then, has read all over it, versus one who just gives you more of a big picture advice. And this isn't just mentors who can be professors, who can be postdocs, they can be graduate students, they can be your peer undergrads. Before you send it to, your professor, can you please, ask your graduate colleague or undergraduate colleague, can you please check this? And, they'll be more than happy to do it. So look at mentors everywhere. It doesn't have to be a professor. It can be, like I said, your undergrad colleague. And you also be a mentor. You also help be, that mentor that's going to help other people. Just don't think about yourself. And with that, thanks everybody for being here. And again, thanks Beto for having me here.
Absolutely. I lied. I have one more thing I wanted to say. So somebody earlier in the chat mentioned, how do you prepare yourself for grad school? I think it was Dana. And I wanted to make a point. I responded to her in the chat. I want to leave it in. I'll leave you with this, that it's not always about if you're good enough for that institution or that program or that job. It's just as valid to consider, is that institution, job, or program good enough for you? Because we have to take into consideration that just because it might be an Ivy League school or a great program, it doesn't mean that it's always the best fit. And it's very important as you continue to move forward that you keep that in mind, that you have that self-worth, which can be challenging sometimes, but that you recognize that just because everybody else thinks it's a phenomenal program or opportunity doesn't mean that it's the best opportunity for you. So don't discredit yourself for 1 second as you make these choices. There are going to be some difficult choices as you move forward about programs that you go into and jobs that you decide to take, or when it's time to leave a certain job, right? And I think Carlos mentioned, you hit a ceiling at some point. You got to ask yourself, is this where I want to stay, or is it time for me to find something else? And these are going to be some of the additional challenges that you're going to I call them good problems. They're going to be some of the good problems that you're going to deal with as you continue to move up in your trajectory and deciding, okay, do I stay or do I go? Is it time to move on? Have I invested myself here? Have I reached my capacity? And I like to say every transition that you make from employment to employer is that as you contract your services out to that employer, did you learn something new? Are you gaining new skills that are going to prepare you for that next phase that you're going to step into? So I promise you, that was my last remark. I thank you all again wholeheartedly for everything that you do. I appreciate that you've spent not only this session or other sessions with us. And with that, please reach out, stay in touch with these panelists. Panelists, thank you very much for your time. Keep up the great work, not only in the work that you do, but the personal work that you do like this and making time for future generations of STEM. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.